Today I'm going to show you how I made this Basketweave cutting board.
I start ripping out the maple strips. And I want the finished width to be 2 inches, so I'm cutting them to a little under 2¼ inches, so that by the time everything settles and moves and I machine it multiple times, I'll have enough material to get back down to exactly the 2 inches that I want.
So the way this is going to work is there is going to be a 1/4 inch strip of walnut laminated to each side of a 1½ inch thick piece of maple. Both of them will be exactly 2 inches wide, and it will be milled to be a perfect 2 by 2 inch square. With the strips cut out and in place, you can kind of get a better sense of how this is going to work. I cut them at a heavy 3/8 of an inch, and then I will plane them down to their final 1/4 inch thickness. These are also still thick, and I'll plane them down to 1½ inches for a total of 2 inches by 2 inches.
Here I'm running the parts through the planer, periodically checking with my caliper to see how close I'm getting to my final dimension. Using a caliper on your planed wood is probably overkill, but my motto is that anything worth doing is worth seriously overthinking.
Missed it by 5/1000ths. Well, I'm no wood whisperer.
Most people usually say that sanding is their least favorite part of a project, but mine is probably doing glue-ups. I can't really think of anything interesting to say about it, but if I don't show it, how will you know I did it? Well, yes, the finished board at the end of the video, but besides that.
So I went ahead and ripped the other side down, and I just moved the fence over just a few thousandths of an inch at a time until I got this dimension the same as this dimension, so that when I flip the pieces over like this, I can't tell the difference with my hand. If I turn every other piece sideways like this, you can start to see the pattern come together. Now the next thing I'm going to do is glue up a panel of these things and then start cross-cutting them off.
So by this point in the build, I was really starting to get tired of doing glue-ups, so I decided to hire this guy to do it for me while I sat there and drank sweet tea.
Dude, not on the table saw.
Looks like I can't win either way.
Okay, so I went ahead and glued the panel up, and I put some cawls on the top and the bottom with some wax paper. I want these to be really even. Normally, with some other designs, it wouldn't matter if there was a little bit of variation up and down, because when I planed it all flat, it would take care of that. But if I do that on this one, it's going to mess up the pattern, so I went ahead and used the cawls on that.
I rolled my planer card over so that I could use its in-feed support table as temporary out-feed support for my table saw, which is either woodworking genius or a really dumb idea. Well, I guess that answers that question. Please don't fall on the floor and break now. After slightly repositioning the planer cart to eliminate that gap, I continued to rip the rest of the strips, which ended up being 9 in total. To make it easier on myself in both glue setup time and board alignment, I decided to do this glue up in 3 parts. First, I glued up 2 segments of 4 strips each, and then I glued those 2 segments together with the final piece. Once the 2 halves of the cutting board had set enough for me to handle them, which in this case was overnight because it's been so hot here this week, that it saps the will to live, much less to build cutting boards, then I can take the two pieces and glue them together with the final piece into the final blank size. Once that assembly is out of the clamps, I shave it on the table saw just barely to make sure that everything on the end lines up. Here I'm using a router sled that I had thrown together from some scraps to flatten the board. The bit I'm using is a 2-inch surfacing bit from Whiteside. You generally want to avoid running an in-grain board through your planer due to the tear out it can cause, board explosions, planer explosions, general death and dismemberment. Doing it with a router sled is much safer, but man does it make a mess.
Okay, the next step is going to be to cut the finger grooves that go in the side to help pick the board up. I use a 1/2-inch core box bit mounted in my router table for that, and the distance between these two stop blocks is equal to the board plus the width of your handle. The board ended up being just slightly under 12 inches, and I've decided a 6-inch handle will look good there, so the distance between my stop blocks is 18 inches centered on the bit. Now that the first cut is made, I'm going to flip it over, keeping the same face out, so that way if there is any error in where I have the bit centered on the width of the board, it'll be the same on each side instead of being offset. What I'm probably going to do is make the same depth cut on the other side and then just increase it just a hair and go back in again on each side, taking off just the slightest bit of material to help get rid of any burn marks. The only thing left to do is to sand all the surfaces, apply a 1/8 inch round over to all of the edges, and then we get to apply some oil. I'm going to start with 80 grit on my random orbit. I'll probably stop at 220 grit. You know, if I'm feeling like it, I may pull out the 400 grit sanding net just because it leaves a really nice glassy smooth surface. The problem with going too high on grit is it can make it more difficult for the oil to get into the board. Since I'm too busy sanding to explain to you what I'm doing, I figured I would come talk to you instead. So I started out with 80 grit paper and sanded that all the way down, and then I moved up to 150. Then I wet the surface of the board with a wet paper towel to raise the grain so that it can be sanded back down, and then I hit that with 220. And I did that twice, or I am doing that twice. After that, I will do the edges with the router bit, and then we will put it in the oil, and that will be finished for this board. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed watching me make this board as much as I enjoyed building it. If you did, leave the video a like, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you on the next build. Take care.